17th here in the United States anyway. Is it not March 17th somewhere, Ken? Do you know? Like it's
Pretty much
probably it's
everywhere.
probably like way over on the past
Yeah, it's
New
the
Zealand.
18th in Australia right now,
Oh, already in Australia? I
2
would have thought
a.m.
of 2 a.m. And my math is bad. I thought it was something like 10:30 there, but I
I've
never.
got a widget.
Oh, see, that's maybe I need a widget. That's cool. So I was just about to push the go live button, and I said, "Ken, are you ready?" And Ken looked like a deer in headlights. He's like, "Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm here.
We are present." So today's ZDTV. Let me throw up the old slide.
What are
Bam.
we talking about?
Yeah. Let's. We're gonna have a working session. I don't know if people appreciate the amount of effort I put into trying to make a cute little Ziggy in a cute little hard hat and a
Oh,
cute
look at
little
that.
working site. Right. I don't know if anybody's ever even noticed that it's a working session thumbnail, but I do try to keep them consistent. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. But there he is. We're gonna have a working session, and we're gonna work on OpenZiti and Kubernetes and a network and networking, and we're gonna just have a working session. So me and Ken and special guest star. Where's Dariush? Let's bring Dariush on. Dariush is back. Everybody clamors for Dariush to come back, so we brought Dariush back. We're gonna just
Okay.
have a working session, and we will play with OpenZiti, play with Kubernetes, and see where it takes us. One of the things that Ken and I were talking about earlier this week, that's been on my mind probably since I started here at NetFoundry working on OpenZiti, is when I learned that OpenZiti had a overlay network and had a mesh, and you could put a bunch of edge routers in a bunch of different locations, and smart routing would take over and do all kinds of interesting routing sorts of things. My very first question is, if I were a telecom, because I come from a telecom background, how could I keep all of my traffic on net? Which is important to me as a telecom, because then I don't have to pay peering charges, and sort of similar to multi-cloud in a lot of ways in that way,
Yep.
right? If I'm staying in the same VPC, how do I keep all my stuff in the same VPC? Or, if you're in Kubernetes land, how do you keep all your stuff in Kubernetes land? So it all kind of comes together. And so Ken and I were talking this week about service edge router policies and the maybe not so subtle mind bender that they are, as well as edge router policies, and how we could use edge router policies combined with service edge router policies, and do some fun stuff. And so Ken and I were having a conversation, and I said, "Hey, why don't we just do this on CDTV, and we'll do it live. We'll see how it goes, right?" Like none of us are shameful. We're happy to be successful. We're happy to be failures. So I thought that would be sounds like fun. Ken's like, "Yeah, I'm up for it." And we got some new Helm charts we can look at. We got some new Terraform provider thing that I don't pretend to understand, but Dariush and Ken can probably talk about, and I can ask dumb questions, so I can play that role. And yeah, what else, Ken? What did I miss?
I'm not even sure where to start, but yes to warts and all, because it is a work in progress, and we kind of have to try to explain it to figure out where to focus attention next. Because I have the sense that there's a lot of useful stuff already built, but packaging it up and communicating what it can do, that's another matter. So that's kind of where my head is at.
Sounds fun. Dariush, what do you want to add? What do you think?
No, definitely. I like the packaging of how we are able to create the Helm charts for routers and controllers, because I was playing with this myself after we worked with Ken a bit, and I can deploy routers like in an instance and actually create multiple, and I could see like the mesh being created like inside the cluster. Not necessarily that what maybe people want, but you never know. And
Well, you got to
it's
start
kind of
somewhere,
cool.
right?
Yeah.
Like Ken was saying, warts and all. You never know what is going to be valuable until you try it out.
Right.
I worked with a guy about probably 5, 10 years ago, and we were having a conversation one time, and he's like, "Clint, I have built the same thing 3 times, right? Like I always have to build it 3 times. The first time totally is wrong. The
Yeah.
second time, I do a little few things, I change it up, and then the third time, I probably mostly get it right. So that's the process, right? Like I'm always amazed when my code actually runs the very first time I write it, which is
Wow.
almost never, right?
Yeah.
So you always got some problems that you got to go fix. So yeah, I mean that's how we
Exactly.
learn. All right, well, where do we want to start, Ken? What do you think?
I'm just going to start talking and like skipping over things and let you slow me down. How's
Oh
that
boy.
sound?
Well, that'll be good because you'll probably be going a mile a minute. As I have said before, I am such a fan of watching Ken on the command line because he is absolutely a wizard with his keyboard. We also have other wizards here. Like I love watching Steven with his command line too.
You learn
So
something when you watch somebody else really getting in there.
you really do, right? Like it's.
Yeah.
I think maybe you and I have talked about that privately, but every now and again, we'll help people out either online, either in the company or just
Yeah.
random people, and you learn a lot just watching how somebody navigates in general. Are they a
It's a
mouse?
skill to be able to
Well,
dictate command line options like hyphen space. Like,
oh boy, you gotta put, yeah, and then I really love. Let's go off on this little tangent, right? So I really do enjoy it when you've got somebody who's relatively skillful and they start trying to like code ahead of you, and then they start putting spaces where spaces don't belong, or
yeah.
adding hyphens where hyphens don't belong. Like no, now it's a flag. It's not. It's like one word, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you learn so much watching somebody else navigate their existence. I
Yep.
find it fascinating. So anyway,
So
I always
I'll
learn. I would like to say I learned something from you, but frankly, you go too darn fast for me. Like I see you hitting whatever keyboard shortcut that pulls up your search history. I don't even know what it is, and then I'm like, oh man, Ken's already lost me. He's got a
That's a
couple.
really nice feature, and I noticed that Kevin was using that as well. And you don't have to use Z Shell for that, but Z Shell makes it easy. There's a plugin.
Yeah, I've never converted. I've been a Bash stalwart for too long, too long.
So what we're talking about is the it's a smart shell history search. It's the big leap over normal shell history search is that you don't have to type the exact character sequence that you're looking for. It's smarter than that. You can type a word and then another word, and they could be out of order in your shell history, and it just finds all the most
Hmm.
relevant searches.
Show
So
me
if I start typing
what's
uh,
your keyboard accelerator? What I want to learn.
mini controller, and then I press Control R, then it starts finding things with that. If I just press space and keep typing cert info, so now I found something that I've typed before with those words in any order, and it's starting to do
I see.
substring matches too
Hmm.
up here. See the little IN is green there because that's
Oh boy.
matching. So it's very fuzzy and how it matches
So it's
your
just a
shell.
regular Control R. Just a ZSH thing.
Correct.
Huh. Well,
Yep.
who knew?
Control R in Bash and Z Shell without that plugin just gives you a verbatim, an exact match of whatever you type.
Hmm.
Yep. Very
Cool.
useful. So I'll just
All
steam
right. So
locomotive ahead
ram it up
and
to 10 here. Let's see. Let's watch.
yeah,
Let's watch
I'm
Ken
gonna
go.
get some stuff done, but I'll explain a little bit, and then you can ask me to unpack more. But what I've got here is like a mock-up of a CI/CD pipeline. If we were going to manage a ZD network and everything in it with GitOps, if we were going to use like a Git repo to control everything, then the CI/CD pipeline, which I haven't built yet, would actually would apply a sequence of Terraform modules, which are sharing some data between them. So what we've real
So
quick, what we've
I'm going to
got
stop right
here,
there.
yeah,
I'll stop right there. So Git being source control, I can put
yep.
some file into my source control, and then when I do that, some process wakes up, and that's the CI/CD pipeline that you're talking about.
When you
R-
release,
when
when
you
you merge to
release
main and release.
whatever you've defined as the trigger,
Exactly.
I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your trigger could be I put a new version stamp on my repo or I merge to main
Yeah, or I push I mean, pushing the button manually wouldn't be so
or
much.
manually.
Well, it's
Absolutely.
not so much a CI/CD pipeline then, but yeah. Okay,
It
so
still is. Yeah.
so I have a file in my Git repository. I have
Yep.
something that either automatically or manually watches that file, and then that process fires off, and then you said applies some Terraform plugins. Is that what I heard you say?
Terraform modules. Yeah, each of
Modules. Yeah.
these
What's a
are
module? What's a Terraform module mean?
it's a like a function. It's the
So
Terraform analog of a function. It's a bunch of files in a directory with a specific directory structure that's reusable Terraform.
okay, okay. So it's a bunch of files in a directory
Yeah.
that represents an end state.
Yep. And you can think, and just like a function, it's got inputs and outputs.
Okay. And so what I'm seeing here is a bunch of changing of directories and then running a Terraform init and then applying the consistently named my TF vars. Is that what I see here?
Yep. This is a little shell script that will exit if it hits any errors. That's why I've wrapped it in parentheses so I could do that without actually jumping out of the shell that I'm trying to use.
Oh,
And
so you're making a subshell so that it
a
doesn't exit.
subshell.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it'll stop running and I can see what the problem was if I do hit an error. And then in each of these directories, we have a separate module.
Well, they are each a module, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Well, now I understand it a bit better.
Yep. So what we're the building blocks that we're working with here are we've got container images for all of our Ziti software. Then we've got Helm charts that use those container images, and so it can run the container in Kubernetes with a bunch of configuration for that application. And then we've got a Terraform provider that knows how to talk to Ziti to create any Ziti stuff that we need. And then we've got a Terraform module is the last piece there that says put these cloud resources into place. Some of them are Ziti resources, and some of them, like for example, a Ziti router, a Ziti controller, it knows how to do all of that. So I'm just going to press go on this. It takes about a minute and a half to
Oh,
run.
And the
apparently it
co-
takes a lot of Ken's bandwidth too.
and
You
Why
cut
do you see
you
that?
cut out you cut out right when you
Oh,
said
really?
I'm going to push
Like,
go and it takes
uh, so the very first module isn't actually going to do anything except check DNS because the very first module is cloud provider specific. I'm using Linode in this example, and what it's done is so it takes a little bit longer to run that. So I did that one in advance because it creates the Kubernetes cluster and it creates the DNS record for the load balancer and it installs Nginx.
And when you say the load balancer, what does that mean?
So in Kubernetes, you can have a bunch of services inside the cluster, but if you want to expose them outside, you have a few different options, and one of them is a load balancer.
Okay. What are the other options? Do you know?
Node port would be if you say to Kubernetes, expose this service on node port, then you pick a port number, and then it opens that port on all the nodes for that service.
And why would one choose load balancer versus node port?
Well, if you wanted to have all
Or
the
why
features
did
of a load
you?
balancer, like for example, if you wanted to do TLS termination, if you wanted to have to route traffic based on the domain name that was asked for. So with this approach, there's a DNS record that points at that load balancer, and it's a wildcard record. So no matter what, so this cluster has a DNS zone, right? So any name in that zone resolves to that load balancer. And that makes it very simple for me to just invent new names because I don't even have to create a new DNS record.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I did something similar with. I mean, wildcard certificates are just dreadfully useful for that. Yeah.
Right.
So why a load balancer though, and why not a node port? Like, what is it? Because yeah, I guess I still don't understand why.
you can load balance across the backend as well, right? Load balancer.
As opposed to DNS round robining kind of a thing, or
Well, if it was a node port, then it would have some TCP port 30,000 or above, and that's
oh,
not always
is that a
ideal.
requirement?
Well, that's the definition of a node port,
Hmm.
at least in some distro of Kubernetes where I learned that. So the our Terraform finished, and so it built a whole bunch of stuff. Let's see. Yep, everything's done. So that
Oh, I
actually
wanted to
built us.
ask. You had run 5 different Terraform modules there, right?
Yeah,
Why is it not one big one? Why five?
because modules have inputs and outputs, and for example, like one creates the controller, and so when it does that, it learns what's the admin password. It learns what's the domain name for the
And that
for the
that
for the
is
Ziti controller,
that is
and
part of the output you were
those
referring
are the
to.
outputs. Yeah, so it feeds those outputs into the next one. Like the next one is the router. So here's what we ran.
And also, we to add to that, we wanted to. I think Ken wanted to. So when you, because you can deploy this in different cloud providers or maybe on site. So you wanted to separate these functions, these modules. So when you like go to Azure, you the first Terraform plan can change into Azure Terraform plan, but the Kubernetes APIs are kind of are the same across all these services, these service providers. So you basically have like an abstraction. So once you
Right.
build the infrastructure, the Kubernetes cluster, then you can run these other ones. So you have you don't have to change the entire plan every time you switch to a different cloud
That's right.
provider. You know,
Only this one is specific to Linode, the cloud
right?
provider. The rest of them are just take a Kubernetes identity so it can start deploying stuff.
How does it transfer its inputs and outputs there? Is it a file or is Terraform maintaining some sort of state in memory?
It's configurable, but modules have when you depending on whether you're running Terraform itself or wrapping it with something like Terra Grunt, which I plan to do, then the like where the data actually goes is highly configurable. Configurable. You can use Terraform Cloud. You can use local file. I'm using a local file right now, and you can also use your own. You can configure your own backend. They call it a state backend.
So there was
That's
some sort
always
of
an option.
environment. There's some sort of environment variable that tells Terraform that, or some configuration file somewhere.
Yeah, it's configuration inside the Terraform plan itself.
You can define that in a backend Terraform file. You can actually define it where what you want to do, local and remote.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, I'm fighting with my mouse a little bit here. Can't seem to move this thing the way I want to. I'm not sure why that is. But, oh, there we go. So at the top of this particular Terraform plan, we have I've just said backend local, and that means it's going to use Terraform's default local file backend provider.
Cool.
So this
Do you have to
Terraform
actually? Sorry.
did a
Do you
lot
have
of
to
work just
each
now.
module? Do you have to scope the inputs and outputs then, in case you run the same thing over and over for different things? You could always make sure that you're namespacing the inputs and the outputs.
The you can declare a dependency between the modules so that you can be sure that one of them finishes and populates the module before it tries to use that in the subsequent module downstream.
And so you just
But
define the name of the overall module, or the overall output. Like, how does Terraform allow you to run, the Plan 10 Kate's one and then a Plan 20 Azure one, and how does it separate them?
um,
You can
it has a
orchestrate that,
notion
right?
of dependency to keep them
Yeah,
separate.
but did you? And when you have a dependency, you express the dependency using something.
Yeah.
So it'll most likely be a prior run. So do you just give it like your? Did you give it like Linode example? Is that the name that you gave it, or am I not asking the right question?
Um, let's see if we have any depends on. So if I wanted this resource, which is installing a Helm chart. No, that's the provider. Here's the router resource. This is a module call that installs a Ziti router in the cluster using Helm, and but the module itself wraps the Helm chart install. So this just feeds all the parameters into the module, and then it does the work. But I could say depends on something like that, and then Terraform knows if it's not
Yes.
able to
So
infer from the variable references that I have here, if it's not able to infer, this is like a hard stop, wait until that is done before you try to run this.
yeah, and so something else creates this particular node, controller underscore state, right?
It's you,
That was the prior module that
Yeah.
ran.
Okay,
So
I see.
it's our state reference here. And that's not the only way to do it. I plan to refactor this so it doesn't use state at all, because I think it'll be a little flatter and cleaner to just use TerraGrunt with modules. So there'll just be one command, one Terraform command instead of a list of them. And I'll express all the dependencies inside of that.
I think
So
I found also that, sorry, Ken, to
mhm,
really depends on, and you probably want to use that a lot. That depends on, even though the Terraform is smart enough to build a graph of dependencies, but I
yeah,
think on the build side is fine. But when you start deleting stuff, I found that if I didn't have even though there was a graph dependency of one, but there was no dependency on the third one versus the first one, it would delete something before it was able to, like, it deleted a connection to the cluster or something like that before I was able to delete services in the cluster. But even though it did that when it was building it, because it built the graph, it was able to build that in the right order. But when the deletion came in, it just started to deleting stuff before the other without having, So I
yeah,
think you're more safe if you explicitly say,
yeah.
depends on
It
that.
slows things down a little bit, but
Right.
you can sometimes you have to make it explicit. But Terraform does try to infer the dependency graph just based on the references, and sometimes, and so it'll do things in parallel, and it will mock up um, values depending on the different stages. One thing we didn't cover is just basically how Terraform works, and so its a mode of operation is first do a dry run to compare the way things are with the way things are supposed to be, propose a plan which shows those differences, and then the administrator can say, yes, please provision any changes that are needed, and that's the effective run that will execute that saved plan, or it'll just generate a new one on the fly if you say, I don't need to use a saved plan. So our Terraform modules built a bunch of stuff. They built a Ziti controller, they first router, created some services, and configured some local client files. One thing I can go ahead and do is point at the services that we have, recipes, services. So we've got three services. These are, one is the Kubernetes API, one is the management API for the cluster for Ziti, and then a basic test API service, which is running the venerable HTTP bin, only Cameron's fork of HTTP bin, which uses a Ziti identity listen on the overlay. So it's kind of nice to have a Ziti embedded app right
Where's
there.
the link to that?
The link to get go HTTP bin,
Yeah.
our fork is in GitHub. Looks like it's in Test Kitchen.
And so this is a Zetified version of HTTP bin.
This is a Ziti fork of Go HTTP bin, and I made
Nice.
a container for it and a deployment, a Helm deployment for it, and then we used it in
When did you do that? I haven't
the
seen this.
Terraform plan.
That's
Oh,
fun.
well, a few months ago.
Oh,
Yeah. So if we look at the Terraform plan that does that work, it might be interesting to kind of map the Terraform, what's called the HashiCorp configuration language that we're looking at right here, over to what I just said about that the the deployment. So here's our HTTP bin deployment. Our resource is a Helm released. We just give it a name. We say don't do this until there's a service available. And we tell it where to find the Helm chart, and we tell it, like, here's the URL to our Helm charts repo, and we tell it to set some values. These are inputs to the Helm chart, our Ziti service name, and a Ziti enrollment. So we get the JWT from the API response when we created the identity.
So right now, there is an HTTP bin that is only accessible through Ziti and is like application embedded server.
That's right. And so I've got a saved command. I'll use my history again here to say HTTP post test API. So I'm sending basically like a webhook post request with the data Ziti equal.
Hold on one moment. I did not see you stop and start your tunneler.
Well, I wanted to show it not working first.
Oh,
Yeah. So I've got all my identities turned off
I
here.
see.
I
I
have
see.
no effective identities in this tunneler. But if I go and add my identity, there's the one that got created a few minutes ago when we ran Terraform. I just had it save the JWT from the API response to create my client identity, save it to my disk so I could do this and reference it. So I'll say load that identity, and then it'll show me the services that I have. And there's that bug again, Jeremy. He said I got to
Oh,
RUD.
I
I
was
need to
going
do.
to mention the fact that Ken
Yeah,
is running Linux here and is using
yeah,
the new UI, which is pretty exciting. What was the
yeah.
bug?
Well, it showed duplicates of those services, so I'm restarting the UI now.
I see.
I heard that Windows was gonna be like this as well because
It
I
already
looked
is. You
I
can,
looked at it. Is it?
yeah, you
Is
can
it?
already download it. It's not. It's a
Oh.
preview. So right now you can go and install the preview for sure.
Hmm.
I have it running, and actually was pestering Jeremy to make a new release and to solicit feedback on Discourse and to solicit feedback internally to get some people using it.
Because when we were working with Ken the other day, I was like, "What is this? This is new Linux?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "How's Windows not like that?" He's
Yep.
like, "Yeah, it's
No,
coming."
you,
I'm like,
yeah, you know,
"Shit,
you can get it right now. I have it installed.
cool, nice. I like it." Where's this in a repo?
You can go out to Desktop Edge Win. Let me find it. Desktop
Looking at
Edge
the
Win.
using kubectl here, I said get pods in the default namespace, and we see our HTTP bin deployment there running. So I asked it to follow the log, and now that I've turned on my tunneler identity, if I send these post requests, we see them going through and coming back. It just echoes back the request data, so I parsed that out right here with JQ.
I see. So now that you've got your tunneler running, you're able to exit or access this information.
That's right.
We got to get you using something like curl Z or something like that.
Using what? Oh,
Curls,
curlz.
yeah.
Oh, I think we could. Yeah, I think we can do that right now. Actually, if you want to, there's
I've not.
Zidify and
I,
curlz.
oh yeah, can you do a Zetified curl? That'd be fun too.
And that would be not using the tunneler. So I'll turn off my tunneler, and we'll try some Zidify. I've been wanting to play with this anyway, so we might as well.
Yeah, it's a working session, right? We did some Kubernetes. We can now do another. We can make another tangent. We did some Kubernetes. We talked about some CSH. Now
So
we can
let me
try
refresh my memory
Zetify.
how you do this. I
So the
know I
first
need to
thing you do,
download
yeah.
the Zidify script.
Well, you need to download the Zetify bundle. So go to the releases tab.
Releases. Okay.
Yep, because it has everything that you need inside of it.
All right.
Get that tar GZ,
Okay.
and then unzip it, and there'll be a couple of shared objects in there and the script.
All right. So that we got a libZetify and a
And then
Zetify.
you need that directory on your path.
Do I need does and libZetify needs to be in the same directory as Zetify?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I think it will just expect it to be on your path.
think I might already have it installed. Yeah, I do, but I'm just going to overwrite it. And so we also need libzetify. These are, well, two of them are symlinks to the other. User local bin. Yeah, I think it has to be in the same directory. I'll just install that real quick.
Nice.
And now I need an identity, huh?
Well, you have the identity that wherever you ran the tunneler from, right?
Oh, I can just use the same identity. So tunneler is turned off, but we can use the identity because it's Linux and it's just a file. And so if I run my curl command without using Zetify, nothing happens. We don't see the request arrive in HTTP bin, and it doesn't give us anything.
Should
It's
give it a
just
minus
stalled
M.
out.
Yeah.
Give it a net minus M.
M is a timeout. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So it doesn't just hang forever.
Yeah.
All right, so in
Now
order
you just
to
now you just put
say
Zetify in front of that.
Zetify, I need to set an environment variable, don't I, to
Well,
tell it where to
you can
find the
provide a
identity
minus
file?
I. Zetify space minus I space my identity space curl.
Okay.
And whatever your
You can do
identity name.
enroll. It's already enrolled.
Where's your identities folder?
This is how I did it last time, was specify the environment variable. But you said I
Well,
could
you can
do
do it
it
that way too.
as
Yeah,
zd-I.
you can do it both ways. It was just it seemed like it was going to be easier to just give it the actual identity. Yep, and then your curl.
All right.
Yep.
That
Let's see.
-I
Minus
not
I
found.
command not found. That's interesting. I mean, the doc clearly says that's what you should do.
The doc is not correct.
Well, that's how it goes.
Yeah, that's the one I just installed.
Well, then let's
Let's
go with the set ZD identities like you were saying before. Oh, interesting. It no longer says ZD identities on the README. When did the README change? README. 2 weeks ago.
It does say
Well,
-I.
it certainly most definitely does. Guess we'll have to get Eugene to fix that. Come on, Eugene.
Well, we
What was
can
what was
fix
that
the
error? No,
It
no
said
minus I.
-I not command not found.
Huh.
It's definitely there.
Yeah.
That's just the usage. Doesn't mean
ZD
it's
identities. There we go. So ZD identities, we can use that
Sure.
without the -I. Let me just move this to the beginning so I can use it. As an environment variable, and I'll put it on a separate line so that it's more clear what's happening. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Yep. There you
we go.
go.
Works.
That is super neat. So we just accessed a ZDified server running
Yep.
HTTP bin using Zetify, the script that implicitly adds ZD to particular libraries that are compiled with libc and not statically compiled and avoiding the system libraries, which is like a Go, for example. Go bundles in its own socket type stuff and doesn't particularly work with Zetify, but with curl it works great. That's really neat. Cool. Well, thanks, Ken. Thanks for taking that detour too.
See, it didn't
Now,
work with HTTPy because it's not a dynamic executable.
oh, is that right? It
Yep.
doesn't use the same
Yeah,
standard
it works with
library.
curl, but not HTTPy.
Interesting. You should report that also to Eugene.
Well, it's expected because it's not a dynamic executable. Statically compiled, probably Go.
Well, then, yeah, that would be
Yep.
a problem. All right. Well, that
Well,
was
it's fun.
fun. That was
Yep.
fun. Yeah. All right. Cool. Cool. Well, we're learning all kinds of stuff today. So now, what are we gonna do with our cluster here? We were gonna goof around a little bit with some policies, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good turn. What we've got now is Ziti on the internet, reachable from anywhere. It's got a router, and like you were in your preamble, you were talking about how whenever you're dealing with clusters, often you want to control the traffic that's inside the cluster, and of course you don't want it to go somewhere else in order to get back to itself, needlessly hairpinning or hopping through suboptimal paths through some other cluster. Not what we want. So how can we express the topology of our clusters and data centers and such as policies? And
Ken,
Ziti,
can I ask another tangent question?
sure.
Are you aware that your certificate expired?
Actually, I'm using a Let's Encrypt certificate from the staging issuer
I see.
so that I don't hit my Let's Encrypt rate limit.
So that it doesn't expire.
Well, it's automatically renewed. This deployment uses Let's Encrypt, uses Acme to continually renew the Let's Encrypt certificate for the console.
And why is the staging certificate important?
So I don't hit my Let's Encrypt prod rate limit.
What is the rate limit? Out of curiosity.
It's bound. It keys on the domain name that's being requested. So in this case, console.lke.some domain name. That's the LKE is the zone that I've allocated for this cluster with
Yeah.
the wildcard record. So it's getting a certificate for this particular name, console dot whatever. And if I ask for that too many times from the prod issuer, as I
How
destroy
many times is
and
too many
rebuild,
times?
maybe five, I think,
Okay.
in a month or something like that.
Oh, in a month. I see.
Yeah.
So this is only this is a an artifact of the fact that you were doing this over and over and over again.
Right. It is a Let's Encrypt certificate, and if I wanted that to be a prod certificate, I'll go ahead and burn one right now so we can see it happen. This is the beauty of Terraform. You just make a change to your file,
Well,
run the
this is actually
plan, and
why I was wondering, is
yeah,
because I was wondering where it would be controlled. I did not see you specify any of that anywhere.
yeah.
It was all
Well,
just
there's a
magical.
so see right here in this particular plan, I just uncomment this, change the variables that are fed into Terraform.
Oh, so you have in each of those Terraform modules, you have gone into each of those Terraform vars files and added the information.
Well, they
Okay, so
have appropriate vars.
that was like the magic that I probably missed at the beginning. I see. I didn't realize that magic would be necessary, but now it makes sense.
So we only need to apply that one plan. The controller plan has the console stuff.
Is it going to destroy my controller?
No, it's just going to make the modifications that are necessary.
So the Terraform plan is smart enough to go in, or the Helm chart or whatever, to go in and just apply the difference in certificates?
Yeah, let's take a look at what it actually changed here. Here's the controller CA certificates. So the change that it detected, oh, I don't see it. Did I maybe run the wrong plan, the wrong module? Did I save the file? I saved it. It's part of the 15 controller plan. I'm not overriding that. Well, that's it's possible that um, I'm
Well, I
just
was just interested
failing
in
to
how
remember something
Helm
here.
would be able to upgrade my controller in that way.
Yeah,
If you
Helm is
went,
pretty smart like that.
but I mean, it would Helm would have to know that. So the Kubernetes configuration is such a way in which the certificate and the key that are necessary are like Kubernetes secret type things. Is that what it's going on?
They are, yes, Cert Manager is managing the material of those private keys and certificates and has a notion of a CA as an API, building on what Kubernetes has in its Cert API, which doesn't provide a lot of automation. Cert Manager allows you to think about the entire life cycle, including auto renewal and issuers from other places. So you can say, for example, to Cert Manager, I need a cluster issuer that can provide me with certificates that implements Acme v2 using Let's Encrypt with this email address, which is an account, a Let's Encrypt account for EFF accountability. And so then it will continually manage using that protocol and that particular identity, the issuance of that particular certificate for that particular application. So lets you express all of that.
I see. So because you use Cert Manager and Cert Manager has Acme protocol baked into it, you can just feed Cert Manager a couple of inputs and it figures it all out.
Yep.
Gotcha. That's what I was missing. Okay. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool, cool.
That's what this is like. Basically, I've configured my issuer now to use this URL, which is prod. Let's encrypt
Now,
prod.
could I change this to say Vault or something else if I wanted?
Yeah,
Like,
as long as there's an alignment between the API and the protocol that's presented at that API and the configuration that you have in Cert Manager. So I've told it to use Acme v2 and given it that URL.
yeah, cool. Cool. All right.
So I'm
I
sorry I
keep
couldn't
bringing
figure
us
out
on
how to
tangents here.
show the issuance working, but it when it's working, it's just a matter of changing those variables and reapplying the plan. Which, if you were doing GitOps, it would be like, yes, that looks good. Everybody's thumbs up, merge to release, and then it would apply it, like I did.
Yep.
So you want to talk about some router policies?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, let's do that.
Um,
You were saying before that maybe we would create a private router, like say in one of our local machines or something along those lines.
yeah. So how about a quick visual aid to talk about the what we're actually trying to accomplish.
That's quite the visual aid.
I wanted to lay out what is a router policy. So I've over here I've drawn a box around two things, and that is a router policy. That's saying that
Box around two things is router
yeah,
policy.
the two things are a router and an identity,
There you
and
go.
this identity is doing some dialing. And
Okay.
what it's dialing is this orangish dashed line, which is a Ziti service. And where does that go? Well, it follows a path all the way over here to the binding identity. But we're talking about router policies. So this router policy allows this identity to use this router. And that allows us to control or steer, if you will, the traffic and say, like, we can know for sure because this router policy is in effect that this identity over here is only going to form its edge links, this green arrow, with these particular routers.
Yep.
And there's also another construct in Ziti called a service router policy, and that associates services with routers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another purple box out here that is saying that these routers are eligible. And the most convenient way for me to think about a service router policy when I'm trying to compute all of this is that it filters the routers that are available in the regular router policy. So if I wanted to constrain it further and reduce or narrow the set of
Mm.
routers that worked for a particular service, then I could do that with a service router policy.
Well, I mean, I would be careful there because
Yeah.
if you have a policy that is an all, this does not constrain it. So the wording that you use, I would change. You know what I mean? Like if you had a service edge router policy that was all, doesn't matter how many more service edge router policies you add, they'll all have access to all. Make sense?
Right. As long as the service router policy is bigger than the router policy, then it doesn't have any effect.
No, no, no. What I'm saying is the way that you said it. I heard the service edge router policy constrains the services that are available. But
The routers that are available.
if you have a service edge router policy already that is all, it does not constrain it at that point. It only
Correct.
constrains it if you don't have a bigger one.
Only if it's
And
more restrictive than the router policy.
no, no, I'm not. I'm not even talking about router policies though. I'm talking. This is where in the preamble I said it's a mind bender, right? I'm not even talking about edge router policies. I'm talking about service edge router policies.
Yep.
When I hear the word constrain, I hear, hey, if you define an all and an all, and then you add another one, you have constrained it. But that is not the case at all.
Well, these are our two constructs. These are the two tools in our toolbox. We have router policies and service router policies. There's an edge in there in the proper naming, edge router policy, service edge router policy. It's a little bit redundant, but all of this, there's edge involved in pretty much all of this. And the same thing applies in reverse. And then in the next slide, you'll see what I mean, because it's more of a real world scenario, applying the stuff that's being introduced here. So like the binding identity, just like the dialing identity, has an edge router policy that allows it to use some router. And
How come there's
the
no
difference,
box?
well, maybe there should be, Clement, but it's getting kind of busy up in there. I guess it's just a dashed line. So feedback received. Thank you.
Mm.
I wanted to put a box there, but it did get kind of
Got
big, right?
busy. Yeah.
So there we have red routers and blue routers, and the only difference is that one is advertising links.
Okay.
So I'm just going to call that a public router and say, private routers. These can do most of the same jobs, but router to router links are only formed in the direction of those routers that are advertising links.
Sure.
Okay?
So your public Kubernetes router would be the red router, and my private router would be the
Exactly.
blue router.
Exactly.
I'm picking up what you're laying down.
Yeah. So quick slide here to kind of bring it home. I've drawn some circles.
It almost reminds me of like mitochondria and cells and
This is very
mitosis.
biological, yeah.
Yeah.
But we got all the
You
same
got
stuff.
DNA on the left, you got RNA on the right, and
This looks like a wrench to me.
looks like a
Yeah.
ranch.
It's a you can open wrench. You can.
Oh, a wrench, a wrench. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 This is all the same stuff, only this time it's in a cluster. So there's a circle around, and it's grouping some of the mitochondria and the lymphocytes, or what's the other thing?
I'm enjoying your diagramming.
All right. So we got two examples here. The real point is that this service that I'm tracing right now stays inside the cluster because it has both of the dialer and the binder. They have router policies for some router inside that cluster, and there's a service router policy that allows both of those routers.
Actually,
And
how neat. So what we could do, well, no, now we can't because inside of Kubernetes, every pod can talk to every pod. Is that correct? Unless you deploy a CNI that prevents it. Is that right?
not necessarily a CNI, but yes, you
Oh,
can
right.
limit.
They have network
Yeah,
policies, right?
yeah, they have several different ways of controlling network flow, but the expectation with Kubernetes core, off-the-shelf Kubernetes, is that yes, all pods are addressable by all pods.
And then I know certain Kubernetes, well, I believe certain Kubernetes implementations, you can add networking policies into Kubernetes itself without having some other CNI, right?
Uh,
Like I thought I read that some Kubernetes allow you to say segment the Kubernetes cluster itself by same namespace.
it's a feature of Calico, for example, which does provide a
Right,
CNI.
Right.
that you might want to use namespaces creatively to segregate your network traffic.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking that it would be interesting to have, because what you're talking about is what we call east-west traffic, right? Where
Like
east-west
this,
is,
yeah, the one going inside the cluster.
yeah, where east-west is defined as
Mhm.
on your particular network. Is that
Mhm.
how you would consider east-west?
Maybe that's what it means as a first principle if we go all the way back to when the term was coined. But in practice, I usually mean that it's inside of a zone or a
I think
cluster.
Yeah.
usually when the east west is between services, the south and north is basically between users and services. I think
But
that's basic.
you could also stretch it to say that north south is like these red links going in and out of the cluster, which are between automation pieces of automation, not users.
Yeah, so users, machines that like trying to access the services, basically.
So I'm interested in your definition, Dariush. So you're saying that consumers of a particular service is considered north-south?
It's because basically north and south. You know, back in the day when the data centers were kind of deploying and they were trying to connect connect data centers. So this is kind of like a smaller version of a data center clusters, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Cluster and cluster used to be like they started with these big data centers and they needed to connect them because they had services in each
Right.
class in data centers and they're trying to have these data centers across the world, across the regions, and they tried to connect them together. So they used to call this north, west, and east because it was between the services, like the HA, services moving from one data center to another data center. It's the same thing in the clusters too. You have the services. It doesn't have to be like east west within the cluster. It could be east west between the clusters too, right? And then whoever consumes these services usually means, I think, at least what I've come across is that it's either some kind of a user or some kind of it could be not just a user, but it could be a service
Uh,
that's not part of that.
doesn't have to be a person,
Yes, doesn't have to be a person.
right?
Okay.
And that you consider to be north and south?
Right.
It sounds like I have had it entirely backward forever.
Well, it all
I
depends on, there are so many layers of abstraction that it's useful within one of those contexts to describe things that are staying inside that context or leaving or arriving from other contexts. That's
hmm.
the most simple, broadest way that I think about it.
I now regret even bringing up the term because
It's
it's
anything. It's anything in networking is debatable.
it seems like such a point of confusion. Like I regret even mentioning it.
Yeah, it
That's right.
is.
That's right.
It's just as confusing. It's just as non-specific as ingress and egress. You have to be
Yeah.
very specific about the context
Yeah.
I
before
see.
the cardinality is meaningful of a flow. You have to talk about exactly what is the boundary that you're
Well, this has
crossing.
been nothing if not a ZDTV full of tangents. So I'm enjoying that. All right, so let's leave that silly term out of the equation. So what you're showing here, Ken, is the desire to have the services on the bottom, the green dot on the bottom, access the green dot on the top, and I can tell that the bottom dot is the dialer because the
Yep.
top dot has a T on it, which
Yep.
is where the terminator exists,
Right.
and so the green dot on top is binding the service. I got it.
Yep.
But
Exactly.
also based on your red lines, I get the idea that there's either a green dot on the other side dialing this green dot, or there's a green dot making a terminator on the other side, or something along those lines.
There you go.
And there isn't the okay, so that's another service. Cool.
Yep. So all routers will build router links to any routers that are advertising availability for links. So the red ones are advertising, and that means the blues are they're dialing links to the reds.
And
Zoom in the wrong
the cool
direction.
about thing is that you can actually those blue routers, right?
Yeah,
They could be private and still advertising links,
they could
but
be.
but since
Yeah,
they're private private IPs or private DNS names which are not resolvable outside of the cluster. They just, if there's no other routers in there, you're just not going to be a mesh
Yep.
inside. But if there are like two or three, they because they can reach each other, so they would create this little mesh, like a private mesh. And
Yeah.
the router on the outside will try to reach them, but obviously that's not reachable, and it would fail
Mhm.
to create a link.
Yeah. I'm only showing succeeding links
Yeah.
in this, but if we turned one of these blues to a red, then the other blue would form a link with it,
Hmm.
and then there would be an even shorter circuit for our service that's staying inside the cluster.
Because we've had some customers like asking for something like along those lines. Why would I want to go outside the public router and then come back in if I want to stay within the cluster? So
Yeah.
that would be like a way to for them to do so.
But as long as you've got one inside the cluster that is advertising for links, then you have a short enough circuit inside the
Yeah.
cluster.
Yep. That makes
Yep.
perfect sense.
Cool. There, and it could be just one router.
Yeah.
Doing, that was the little edge hairpin, like Robert likes to call it, inside the cluster.
Yep.
Like you just bounce off that red one.
Yeah, you're not using the fabric at that point. It's just you go into the edge and you exit the edge right away. Yeah.
And and it's also true that we could have just one blue one here. And the consequence of that is that routers in other places wouldn't try to form any links to any routers in our cluster, but we could still the router that our one blue router would still reach out and form links with any other public routers. So everything still works perfectly, and we can still have our little edge hairpin. We could bounce off this blue router that I'm tracing right now, and that would be our short circuit between the two green dots, even with no red routers at all. This
Mhm.
blue one would still build that link to other places, and all the traffic would still flow across our router mesh as expected.
And
So lots of options. This is just sort to hopefully illustrate the concepts.
the cool thing about that is if you ever Zitify your applications, then you can quickly get a kind of a Istio kind of mesh and things that you can actually use that router to block connections between these services based on policies and stuff.
What kind of policies? What do you mean?
Like like the one, like if you had more green dots and you have if you didn't want, let's say if you had like maybe a different like green and red dots in there, and you don't want the red dots to reach the green service, you could, because of it's because it's Zitify. Obviously, if it's not Zitification and there's an open connection into the routers, then obviously we don't control anything. But
Gotcha.
that's why.
So, so if
Yeah,
the server is Zetified, like
yeah,
Ken's example, his
yeah.
HTTP bin that he installed, I see.
Yeah, yeah. So it
Yeah.
opens up things that, abilities that if you can Zitify it, you would have simplified version of like a mesh or something like that. If
Yeah,
you if you think of it, that way.
yeah.
But
Well, I hate saying this, but it's already 12 o'clock.
Yeah, we need more time.
We went off on a bunch of tangents. I thought it was really interesting and exciting. Do we want to maybe consider another one, or do we want to keep going? What do we think?
Um, I've got
Sounds
time
like another
to
one.
if you want
Oh,
to try to
sounds like another
squeeze
one to me.
in if you want to try to squeeze in a second router deployment
yeah,
and
Oh, sure.
maybe exercise one of these scenarios.
All
So
right.
tell me which of the three scenarios you think is the most interesting and doable. I'll see if I can list the ones that Darius and I have been
Well, I
talking
like the
about.
idea that Darius just brought up of accessing the HTTP, the Zetified HTTP bin in a known way, in a way that I'd like to use that in some way. Can
Okay,
we do that? Can
let's.
maybe can we oh, and actually you can do the Zetify right from within the cluster too. That's actually neat. So maybe I need a Zetify. Maybe I should do the Zetify, or maybe Darius
We should
should.
have a Zetify. Maybe we should have a Zetify container or some kind of like automation that puts a Ziti into a container.
My mind is broken thinking about that when I
I'll
can
stop
just
brainstorming now. We're getting into a tangent.
you and
But
your you love the container, man. I love it.
is well, it has flaws, but it's useful too.
Yeah, yeah.
So what which
I definitely recommend people if they want to create something to learn or quickly stand up a Ziti controller and stuff like that. I think this the way that Ken created this in this repo using a Terraform and stuff like that. I think I instead of using the quick start VMs or something like that, I recommend people look into that so you can like stand up something within seconds. Oh, not seconds, but a minute or
90
so in
seconds.
90 seconds. But it's
I'm happy for people using whatever they want to stand it up. If they want to stand it up with this, then awesome. If they want to run Docker Compose, then awesome. If they want to, however they want to do it,
but
right?
this
Yeah, I mean,
this
if
is
you're out
cool,
there, tell
right?
me if you want what you want. But what I'm thinking of doing is creating a Terraform template repo using Terra Grunt, so you can click, duplicate, well, create your own repo from that, and then plug in your cloud provider key and merge to main to build it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'll be good community feedback on discourse
yeah, I would
for
like
sure,
to.
for sure. Cool. So let's. I think Ken. I think I want to go install Zetify, and
Okay,
I'm going to need an identity from you.
I'll send you an identity. And are we going to put a fence around your edge router? Are you going to run
Hmm.
a private router and put a fence around it with a router policy so that we can show that you're still able to connect to things in a workload running somewhere else that has a totally different policy, and you're only using your private router is one thing we could exercise.
Okay, so I need a private router first, then.
You would need a private router to show that. The or if you just want to show Zetify, you can I could just send you an identity and you can try connecting to the existing service.
Well, so what I think is well, I wanted to be able to get into multi-cluster at some point. Like maybe we should do another one of these where like I have a cluster running and we do exactly the demo here, right?
Yeah,
You don't have two clusters, do you?
I
You
can build
only
another one.
can you?
Yeah, I think I would need another DNS zone and
Oh yeah, we have
maybe
to set that
maybe
sort of stuff up.
15 minutes to do
Yeah.
that.
Well, I don't want to wait for 15 minutes. So maybe we should just do that on the next on maybe a next time
All right,
thing then.
I
Maybe
can come prepared with two clusters next time.
all right, maybe we can have a little bit more than a day of prep time, and this was a good ZDTV. But I think what we should do is I think would be neat showing showing traffic going from the green node here to the green node on top, and only through there, right? And
Yeah.
somehow we have to prove that it doesn't exit the
Well, we can
cluster.
see the router links.
Yeah, but I want to. I mean, I know you're telling me that, but I want to. I want to actually prove it somehow.
I think if you create two routers in there and they create private links, then you can go to create on the fabric side. You can look at the circuits and you can see
I
that way,
agree. I agree. But
something like
being a
that.
skeptic, I want to be able to prove it. You know what I mean? Like, I want to
Yeah.
be able to monitor the outbound connection, like using TCP dump or something that is not ZD specific, that proves no traffic went from one place to the other place,
All
that
right.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then it would be interesting to be able to reuse or to use the other cluster and actually send traffic from one cluster to the other cluster. But that'll take a lot of extra work, right? Well, then we probably need those, some sort of DNS capability from the cluster. Is that true? Like, how am I going to get from one cluster to the next cluster?
Well, you can run a client in a pod and use the DNS inside of that pod.
So I could run a ZDH tunnel in the pod.
It would be a ZD tunnel T proxy is the only thing that works in a pod.
Okay, and that's a forward proxy, right? Like I would have to
Yep.
specifically go to a particular IP in a particular port.
Your application would use a ZD service address, an intercept address to connect. And the sidecar would resolve that domain name to a Ziti intercept IP and grab the traffic on the way out.
Oh, and you said T proxy?
Yep, Ziti tunnel
Oh,
T proxy.
I thought you said proxy. I'm sorry. I see.
It
Okay.
uses IP tables T proxy.
Yeah. Got it. I got it. Okay, so you would still be able to use an intercept then, but
Yep,
you have to use ZD tunnel. Is what you're
you
saying?
have to use Ziti tunnel. It's the only thing that works in a sidecar.
Yeah.
Gotcha. What about a runner? A router? Would a router also suffice?
It's just a bit more
Since it,
complex to configure it, but
yeah,
yes, it has the necessary features.
yeah. Okay, well maybe we'll think about that then, and come back with a different ZDTV.
Alrighty.
All right. Well, Dariush, thanks for showing up and helping out. Ken, thanks for taking us on a tour and showing us the cool Terraform stuff. That was neat. Definitely was cool to see the whole thing materialize in 2 minutes or whatever it took. That was cool.
Yeah, if anybody
Definitely.
wants to be an early adopter and jump into the fray with the Terraform stuff, there's a public repo out there called in Ziti Test Kitchen, and it is called the GitHub LKE repo here, and I'll drop a link in the YouTube video description so that you can run this yourself if you want to.
Every time I look at this, all I think is Eisenhower. It looks like Ike to me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Everything.
There's a long tutorial tacked on to this, which sort of was my intention was to hold your hand and lead you through several different things that you would probably need to know in order to do this successfully. So it's got what you need to install and a few different example commands for doing the things you saw me doing, like logging in with the ZDCLI and getting the admin password, that sort of thing.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it up then. We'll call it a ZDTV. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.